So, I'm a curator by training and an educator, and I've worked primarily outside of institutions, independently or in collective, non-institutional projects for many years. I arrived in Montreal from Mexico City in 2012 to take over the SBC Gallery of Contemporary Art, which is now a small non-collecting centre d'exposition with museum status, although we currently occupy a space of 85 square meters. We are on Iroquois territory. SBC is the new incarnation of what had been the Sadie Bronfman Centre, an important Anglophone institution in Montreal, which was established in 1967 by the Bronfman family. We are no longer, we are a completely separate legal entity now. We are called the SBC Gallery of Contemporary Art. This is essentially what remains of the Sadie Bronfman Centre. I came to the institution at a moment in which SBC, no longer the Sadie, but custodian of its archive and institutional memory, and no longer associated with the Bronfman family, except in the initials of its name, was in search of an identity, the institution. So, and that is the space of, this is SBC's space, the current space. It's always been thought of as a temporary space, but we remain there for the time being. So I come at this presentation having spent a fair amount of time thinking about institutions, not as four-walled things, but very much as verbs. Today, I'd like to talk about what I've learned about the practice of instituting, sort of on-the-ground practice of instituting, and perhaps we can think about this in the context of the Summit on Leadership. So, to instituting, what happens when we verb things? I propose that the edges of the thing come into focus, but also become porous and shapeshift. And one's relationship to the moving target that is the institution, the thing in this case, becomes one that is constitutive. The act of instituting, then, I would say, is always constitutive and always political. I'm talking about something like, when the Liberals decide to build a cabinet of 50% women, the institution that is the political apparatus is constituted in a balanced way. When a 15-year-old trans kid decides to use the boys' or the girls' toilet at high school, that action is constituting that educational institution. When a museum or performance venue decides to show disproportionate numbers of white male artists, for instance, and yes, it is a decision, the institution constitutes as a place that does not reflect the general population of its locale, no matter which locale, because as we know, there are actually a little bit more women than men on the planet. I think it's 51-49%. When Aboriginal adults are overrepresented in admissions to correctional services, nearly 1/4 of admissions in 2013-14, according to Statistics Canada, while representing only 3% of the Canadian adult population, the country proves itself structurally constituted by its colonial legacies. Métis feminist writer and sociologist Zoe Todd's writing, in which she clearly designates law a verb, has been really essential to my thinking about the potential of making what we imagine to be monolithic, fixed things active, so by verbing it. There's agency and agents in active law, of all things, law. So when we become mindful that we, not just as cultural workers, but also as board members, as parents, as children, as consumers, as commuters, as members of a gym even, as citizens, as settlers, or as First Nations peoples, are continuously constituting the institutions we associate with, museums, the family, urban infrastructure, political apparatuses. An awareness of the act of instituting can perhaps lead to clearer vision and choices as to the ways in which we want our institutions to behave. That is, we are what makes our institutions. We, the directors, the CEOs, the artists, the publics, the administrators, the passers-by, with our blind spots and our moments of clarity of vision. We constitute our institutions. So I propose that good leaders disrupt the status quo of entrenched power relations and allow for that instituting to happen at all levels, indeed to embrace it, no matter how difficult the process may be. Human rights theorist Thomas Keenan recounts the opening ceremony of the 5th Annual AIDS Conference in Montreal, at which, for the first time, the group of activists, ACT UP, which I'm sure you all know, commandeered the stage for an inaugural ceremony. We hereby inaugurate the 5th Annual AIDS Conference. They also read a manifesto, what came to be known as the Montreal Manifesto. The medical conference, until then peopled by doctors, pharmaceutical companies, and no people with AIDS, PWAs, was reconstituted by the activists and henceforth was open to who should have been the obvious participants. One cannot always wait for the appropriate sanctioned circumstances to present themselves in order to act. So coming back to SBC, these are kind of grand things. We work on little baby scales, you know, so I want to just show you a few projects that we've worked on, something like what instituting kind of can look like on the ground. So we run a program at SBC that consists of long-term research where a given topic, we call them focus programs, a given topic is foregrounded over the course of several years. And what I call living research is carried out through work with artists and cultural practitioners on exhibitions, screenings, workshops, and other events, many of them educational. The first topic of study was sovereignty, and research developed during this 3-year focus program continues to inform the work that we do on a very fundamental level. At SBC, artists and other collaborators are always invited to work through a project in progress. We rarely borrow finished work or hang things on the walls. This is very much our working methodology. This was a project where we worked with a philosopher, curator, an artist, and a designer from Brazil, who were invited to Montreal, and they actually set up a sewing machine at SBC where they literally work on the walls of the institution, building a second skin for it from the colonial fabric chita. It's called chita, which is popular in Brazil as a fabric used for tablecloths and aprons and whatnot, popular fabric. Or, for example, this is an exhibition called Talk Show that happened about this time last year, where the format of the interview itself was taken on. So historical material was mixed in with new artist commissions and many live events, with each of the projects thinking through the reconfiguration of power hierarchies in the spatial and structural establishment that is the interview itself. So the interview, the structure was turned on its head within the interviews themselves that we were showing. Or, for example, Anishinaabe artist Maria Hupfeld's project, Present Absence, that she did at the gallery in 2013 into 2014. In her performance, Maria moves through the space of the gallery, marking territory, displacing the crowd, and here, taking a pose that mirrors the image of herself that you can see here on the door, laying down the crown this is permanently etched on the glass front door of the gallery. So our small, non-collecting museum must now take care of this work, as we all, I would say, must take care of our institutional memories, histories, both from the distant past and new ones in the making, while we institute our institutions into what we, and those around us, want them to be and to do, again and again and again. Thank you.